Tonight's top stories: historic first at MI6. Britain is preparing for a groundbreaking moment in intelligence history. Blaise Metreweli, whose surname is of Georgian origin, has been appointed the new chief of MI6, the UK's secret intelligence service. Well, she becomes the first woman to lead the agency in its 116-year history, following the end of Sir Richard Moore's 5-year term. So, who is Britain's new spy chief? She's a seasoned intelligence officer with experience spanning the Middle East, Europe, and an expert in cyber espionage and data security. Metreweli currently heads MI6's Tech and Transformation Department and holds a degree in social anthropology from Cambridge University. Her appointment marks not just a shift in leadership, but a wider evolution in how Britain is reshaping its intelligence operations for the threats of the 21st century. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has made a pivotal trip to Kazakhstan, attending the second China Central Asia Summit in Astana. His visit coincides with the G7 summit, signalling China's growing influence in Central Asia and a strategic counterpoint to Western diplomacy. Well, first, let's head to London and get the latest report from our correspondent there, Laura Westbrook.
Well, Blaise Metreweli is currently SIS Head of Technology. This is a role known as Q, which you might remember was James Bond's mastermind gadgeteer. And until now, a female spy chief has only headed MI6 in the James Bond movies, with Dame Judi Dench playing the fictional role. Now, back to reality. According to the Financial Times, Metreweli is a self-confessed geek. She studied at Cambridge University and had initially applied to work as a diplomat before being diverted to the Secret Intelligence Service's recruitment track, where she has been a career intelligence officer. The 47-year-old speaks Arabic. She's held a number of operational posts across the Middle East and Europe. And she said that she was proud and honoured to lead the service. Prime Minister Keir Starmer calls the promotion an historic appointment at a time when the UK was facing threats of an unprecedented scale. Now, much of the British press has focused on the fact that Metreweli is the first woman to lead MI6. Unlike its sister UK spy agencies, MI6 has never had a female head. Outgoing Chief Sir Richard Moore said in a speech last year that he had never seen the world in a more dangerous state. He pointed to the resurgence of ISIS, a more assertive China, and the instability that's been brought from Russia's war in Ukraine. Another of her challenges will be managing the service's changing relations with the CIA. This is traditionally its closest allied agency, but is navigating a period of diverging security interests under President Donald Trump. Metreweli will also now remain in the UK to become chief. This is a role known by the moniker C. She is the agency's only officer who is named and publicly acknowledged. Laura Westbrook for A News in London.
Okay, let's delve deeper now and bring in Peter Knoope, former director of the International Centre for Counter-Terrorism. He's a leading voice on intelligence reform and counter-extremism, with decades of experience advising governments and institutions on security strategy. Peter, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Okay, let's talk about the new C then. So her experience is in counter-terrorism, but also in innovation, technology, the digital cyber world. How do you think that's going to reshape MI6's strategy against the new future of terrorism threats?
Well, terrorism, we see a lot of new developments in terrorism of late. There are several. One of them is obviously, now maybe we should start by redefining what terrorism actually is. Terrorism is an act, a violent act out of a political motive. So if you want to influence politics, you want to change the politics of your country, of your region, of your city, of your environment, then violence is one of the means to try and influence that situation. Now that those modus operandi, those methodologies, so the terrorist modus operandi is being used across the board by different actors, increasingly also state actors. And that is something that is totally new. We've seen of late in between India and Pakistan a standoff because the Indian accused the Pakistanis of supporting a terrorist organization that committed an attack in India. Now that is not a single event that happens across the board. So we see that terrorism is shifting from non-state actors to state actors, which is a major change.
Very interesting. And the type of threat as well, the way in which terrorists, state actors even, exert their influence. Obviously, there's been a huge shift to the cyber world. Are there other things too, like reputational damage through the media? You know, give us a sense of what this new world, this new battlefield, if you like, actually looks like.
Well, there's disruptive activities online. There's sabotage online. There is, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly where that comes from. So it's very difficult to pinpoint who is the actual person or institution or organization or state that is behind the threat. It is increasingly difficult to trace back who exactly is disrupting or sabotaging your environment. And again, in quite a number of cases, we've got proof that it wasn't a non-state actor, but it was a state. Now, that is not necessarily violence in the classical sense of the word, but it is influencing your security, your safety, the safety of your people, the stability of your country, maybe even your elections. All that is happening online, and actors are increasingly active in that domain. And again, you know, it doesn't lead to immediate victims in the sense that there's dead bodies and body bags, but it leads to damage to your society. So that in that sense, it is changing.
And we often hear about the power, the threat of online radicalization, ideologies that are being promoted and fostered in the digital world. In your view, is that where the major threat presents itself, or is it more in the sort of geopolitical engineering? Give us what should we be most worried about, Peter, in the future?
Yeah, well, the scary thing is that they happen both at the same time, simultaneously. If you look at what happened a couple of days ago in the United States, where Democratic politicians were killed by citizens, that is a political act of violence. That is what we call within the definition, that is violence, and it's not online. There's nothing online, but the radicalization, the process that leads to that activity. So the online radicalization happens in cyber, in online space, but then the actual act is offline in reality. So the online preparations leads to real life actions in practice. So it's the combination of the two that makes it really difficult. And also we see online radicalization happening to younger people increasingly, not also right-wing extremists, misogyny, there's racism, there's Islamophobia. All of that happens at the same time. So there's a diversification of different extremist movements, extremist radicalization, and they're not all in the same space. They're not all in the same ideological space. That, you know, in the good old days of Al Qaeda, it was pretty straightforward. Today, it's much more diverse in terms of ages, in terms of actors, in terms of ideologies.
Many analogies drawn in the media today surrounding the news of this appointment, quoting James Bond, you know, the world of spies. I presume that that world of the movies is very different to the reality. I mean, what sort of challenges will the new Xi be facing on a daily basis?
Well, one of the was already mentioned in your introduction, is that the international cooperation, the international alliances are changing. So who's your friend, who's your enemy is one of the problems that Xi will be confronted with. Who can you trust? Counterintelligence, intelligence, counter-terrorism is all about trust. You get some information from somebody, you need to trust that person, and you give something in return. If there's no trust between the agencies internationally, that is a problem. And it's increasingly me for myself, and I look after my own interest, and I don't cooperate. International cooperation is increasingly becoming under pressure, and that is definitely one of the challenges that Xi will be confronted with. How do you work with others if you can't trust them? Even within the European Union, within the European space, there's certain countries and governments that are less trusted by the others than previously. So the trust issue and the lack of trust is one of the major challenges that Xi will be confronted with.
I think a lot of people, Peter, would be in a way surprised to hear that trust is even possible between agents of different countries in a world where double agents, triple agents, long-term embedded spies exist. That actually, despite all of that it really is possible and important for spies, intelligence officers to actually genuinely trust one another.
Yes, and the interesting thing is that until a couple of years ago, that was very much the case. There were the Five Eyes, those intelligence agencies from Canada, US, and Britain and Australia that worked together very closely on a daily basis and exchanged information and were warning one another if there was an issue. That is no longer the case, and that rapidly changed. That changed at a very high speed. So that, for the general public, is something that should be of concern.
And finally, Peter, just these, I'd be really interested. You've advised many different actors, many different governments around this area of work. Have things changed in terms of the secrecy of these agencies? Because I suppose even naming the head of the agency comes with it certain risks. What's the right level of transparency and engagement with the general public when it comes to these agencies that do very secretive work?
Well, secrecy and is part and parcel of the work. You can't do without. It's you need to work under the radar. You work on the basis of trust with somebody that is your informant, and you need to be able to trust that informant. So that is a very delicate issue. And so it's extremely complex.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Peter. Great to hear your analysis, and thank you very much for joining us on Newshour.
My pleasure.
Okay, now to Astana, where Chinese President Xi Jinping is deepening ties in Central Asia. His visit to Kazakhstan comes as part of a broader regional push timed alongside the G7 summit. Let's take a look at the story.
President Xi Jinping has landed in Astana, kicking off a pivotal state visit to Kazakhstan ahead of this week's China Central Asia Summit, an event poised to strengthen Beijing's foothold across the region. Welcomed with full state honors by President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, Xi's arrival underlines the growing strategic partnership between the two nations. It's his fifth trip to Kazakhstan and his first return since unveiling the Belt and Road Initiative in Astana over a decade ago. Ahead of the formal summit, the two leaders met for bilateral talks behind closed doors. According to Chinese state media, the agenda included trade expansion, infrastructure financing, digital connectivity, and energy security. But behind the handshakes lies a broader geopolitical calculus. China views Kazakhstan not only as a trusted neighbor, but as a critical transit state for its westward economic ambitions. The Belt and Road routes through Central Asia now carry billions of dollars worth of trade and investment each year, and Beijing is eager to deepen those links. New deals are expected on oil and gas pipelines, renewables, rare earth minerals, and possibly even space technology. The summit also carries heavy symbolism, presenting China as a stable and reliable partner at a time when Western engagement with the region appears to be receding. Beyond economics, security cooperation is gaining momentum. The Taliban's presence in Afghanistan, cross-border terrorism, and the need for counter-narcotics coordination all feature prominently on the shared agenda. The summit will convene all 5 Central Asian leaders, representing Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, for a series of joint declarations and working sessions. For Astana, it's a moment of diplomatic prestige. For Beijing, it's a stage to reinforce its narrative of peaceful development and regional leadership.
Well, joining us now is a guest who will be no stranger to regular viewers of Newshour. John Kavlik, Senior Editor at Issue Insight, currently in Moscow. Mr. Kavlik, always good to speak to you. This is a big deal, isn't it? China taking the decision to come to this event. What does it tell you about the role of Central Asia versus Western engagement in the mind of China?
President Xi, looks at the approximate 84 million potential consumers within the grouping, the stans. The fact that almost all of them have direct border or indirect border connectivity to China. And from his standpoint, he takes his 747-400, the same type of aircraft President Trump covets, and he lands in Astana. And he's basically Santa Claus, because what he can bring to these countries is what the members of the G7, and including what the Russian Federation, can't. He could bring a checkbook, and that checkbook has money in it. It isn't just he writes the piece of paper and says, we'll get back to you when you can cash it. He can deliver infrastructure funds. He can deliver to consumers in these countries cell phones and electric vehicles from BYD, clothing, other technologies. And these countries, one of the problems they have is as their economic development is slow to gain traction, the potentiality of young people leaving. And they need those young people to stay. So President Xi basically arrives as sort of a fluffy Santa Claus. And unlike the G7 members and the Russian Federation, he's very, very welcomed.
It's very interesting, the amazing analogy, the fluffy Santa Claus arriving, bearing gifts of cash and electric vehicles, infrastructure. But then what comes after that, John, is because, of course, the investment, infrastructure, of course, you can see how that would be extremely welcome. But are there geopolitical implications, security implications that necessarily then follow?
They generally do. Belt and Road Initiative does come with consequences, somewhat like a gambler. If you gamble, yes, you may win, yes, you may lose. And many of these countries that have accepted Belt and Road connectivity, they've been left with tremendous debt. And in some cases, China has renegotiated. Some cases, China has taken over the asset. And in other cases, the asset's been expropriated and China's lost. So Belt and Road, is a little bit of commercial terror for some of these countries. However, they also are looking at what are their choices. And the 27 members of the European Union, the representation of the G7 now meeting in Canada, they're not tremendously interested. Because there's distance, because of the religious differences, which are big because they go to how governance is maintained. And then you've got Russia. And Russia's been busy with Ukraine, its resources drained, and Russia can't do what President Xi of China can do. And the other is that Russia has a reputation where these countries will look and say, these guys aren't particularly friendly. They're sort of threatening that if we don't buckle, if we don't agree to embrace them, they're going to do something to destabilize our government. Whereas President Xi, yes, there are risks, but with his risks are a lot of cash, a lot of consumer goods to help make our populations happier.
And this is very interesting, John, not least because you're speaking to us from Moscow. But as you say, this role of the two big actors when it comes to Central Asia and South Caucasus too. This is a region that requires a certain diplomatic dexterity, dealing with complex situations in the surrounding geography. Is it a mutually exclusive choice, though, or is there more complexity to it? Because I suppose this is a region, Central Asia, that has to some degree deal with both Russia and China. Do you see a sense in which those relationships are starting to change, perhaps for good?
I would say they're starting to change. Most of these stans have, I'll call, they're not liberal, robust democracies. They tend to sort of go on the authoritarian side, on the side of one party being in power for an awful long time. Now, in the case of either of those, both China and Russia, they know how to deal with those countries. Where they both have more issues are the robust democracies. So President Xi and President Putin are right at home dealing with these countries. However, they also, again, from the stans, they were part of what was the USSR. They were republics of the USSR. 91, they became countries. President Xi, on the other hand, China's just always sort of been there. And again, it's about deliverables, but are there potential challenges? China and Russia both saying, well, wait a minute, do we want to be competing for these countries, or do we want to be cooperating? And generally, I think most of these governments are going to look at China as more reliable, as less threatening than they are the Russian Federation as it is today. Because circling back to that consumer discussion, what does Russia truly have to export to these countries versus the basket, the catalog that China brings to any of these countries?
And John, would you say, does China generally tend to prefer to engage unilaterally? I'm just thinking of China's investment into African countries, for example, or will it tolerate some form of partnership?
Well, with Africa, great example, South America as well, where China went in because no one else had the financial capacity, including the United States, to just go in and say, oh, Peru, you need a new port, you need a railroad so you can go from the port inland, $3, $10, $20 billion, we're in. No one else was doing that, including the countries Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Oman. Even those countries didn't have the kind of resources that China was bringing sort of to the table. So I think that they'll continue to be they'll be circumspect, but what China has to offer, very few others can provide. And so if these countries are looking to jumpstart, as opposed to if they're looking to engage with G7, European Union, United States, that support's going to come with a lot more caveats. It's going to come with a lot more requirements. Whereas China's more willing to say, we're sort of okay for you to be who you are, just pay your bills, and you can basically count on us. But these countries have learned, watching Africa, watching South America, you just don't want to get in too deep. So I think there'll be some jockeying there and some negotiating.
Fascinating stuff. Always great to get your analysis, John. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Moscow. Okay, that does bring us to the end of tonight's News Hour. From the historic shift at the heart of British intelligence to China's strategic charm offensive in Central Asia, we've tracked the people and politics shaping our world. From all of us here at A News, thanks for being with us.